They told everyone I was dead to the family. At my own niece's graduation. Imagine sitting in the back row, uninvited, listening to your sister imply you'd abandon them in front of 100 people. But I didn't walk out. I walked up, took the mic, and calmly said, I didn't drift away. I was erased. Hi, I'm Rachel. And this is the story of how I went from being boxed out of my family's life to reclaiming my name, my voice, and the house they tried to take from me. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. I was pouring the last of the hot water through my French press when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I nearly let it ring out. I had half a mind to blame spam calls and move on with my morning, but something in me paused. I wiped my hand on a kitchen towel and answered. Rachel Langley. Yes? This is Officer Walters with Asheville Police. I'm very sorry to inform you that your parents, Edward and Joan Langley, were involved in a car accident this morning, a serious one. My grip tightened around the edge of the countertop. Are they okay? There was a beat too long. I'm sorry, they didn't survive. I don't remember setting the phone down, only that I found myself staring at my coffee, still steeping, while the sun slanted through the blinds and caught dust motes dancing in the air. My breathing came in short, unanchored gasps. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I registered that the kettle was still warm, the countertops were clean, and my life, until 1 minute ago, had been untouched. I slid to the floor. Not dramatically, just slowly, like my body needed less air and more gravity to make sense of the moment. The last text I'd gotten from Mom was a grocery list: eggs, almond milk, something for dinner if I was feeling fancy. No goodbye. Just that. I hadn't replied, not because I didn't care, but because it felt like there was always tomorrow. It took me 20 minutes to make myself get up. My hands moved on autopilot. Phone, contacts, Melanie, my sister. It rang twice. Hey, she answered. Her voice rushed. I could hear a toddler wailing in the background. Mel, it's me, I said. Did you hear about Mom and Dad? Yeah, she said, and then added, the police called me too. I waited for something more, but nothing came. I don't even know where to begin. I'm going to start looking into arrangements. The hospital said someone needs to go identify them and... Rachel, I've got my hands full. Noah's been up since 4, and Brian's flying back late tonight from Seattle. I can't just drop everything. I swallowed hard. I wasn't asking you to drop everything, I know, she cut in, her tone sharp and final, but you're better at this stuff. You always were. I sat in silence, phone still to my ear, listening to her life clatter in the background like silverware in a sink. Eventually, she added, just let me know when the funeral is, okay? Sure, I said, but I don't think she heard me. The line had already gone dead. I stared at the screen, then slowly set the phone down on the table. It buzzed once more, a calendar reminder about a Zoom meeting I was no longer going to attend. I dismissed it. The apartment was silent. My place isn't large, just a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a converted brick house a few blocks from downtown. It's comfortable, clean, sometimes too quiet. Most days I liked the stillness. Today it felt like a vacuum. I walked back into the kitchen. The French press had gone cold. The coffee sat there, untouched. I poured it anyway and took a sip. It was bitter. My laptop still glowed on the desk, spreadsheets open, names and numbers neatly aligned. I closed it. Sometimes people think being independent means you have everything figured out. I used to think that too, that if you paid your own bills, managed your own grief, no one could touch you. But I was wrong. You can build a fortress with your own hands and still feel the earthquake when it hits. That afternoon I called the hospital, then the funeral home, then my boss. I rattled through the list like I was prepping for a client audit. efficient, composed, just as expected. Only I wasn't okay, not even close. By early evening, I'd heard from 2 cousins and 1 neighbor who'd just found out. Melanie hadn't called again. I didn't expect her to. She and I had grown apart in that slow, invisible way siblings sometimes do. No big fight. Just a dozen missed birthdays and maybe next times. I had a jacket hanging by the door. Dad's, actually. A denim one he left behind the last time they visited. I reached for it now and held it to my chest. There are moments in life when time stops being something you count and instead becomes something you feel. An ache in your ribs, a tightness in your throat, a kind of quiet you can't explain. People say grief is like a wave, but they never tell you what to do when it doesn't recede. That night, I didn't cook, I didn't clean, I didn't cry. I just sat in my favorite chair by the window, letting the silence settle like dust over everything I didn't have the energy to process. At some point, I looked around my condo. There were 2 coffee mugs in the sink, one from yesterday, a denim jacket by the door, my own laptop, phone, wallet on the table, 1 toothbrush in the bathroom, 1 name on the lease, 1 life. Mine. And no one else to carry the weight. Melanie arrived 20 minutes late to the funeral, in nude stilettos that sank slightly into the damp grass as she stepped out of her car. She held Sophie's hand like it was some sort of shield, keeping her between herself and the stairs. Brian followed behind them, his posture stiff in a too-perfect charcoal suit. I watched from the doorway as they walked up, dry under a shared umbrella, hair untouched by the drizzle that had curled mine into submission. I hadn't seen Melanie in person in over a year. She looked polished. Polished in the way someone looks when they've had enough sleep and just the right amount of attention. She offered a polite hug, arms light and her perfume heavy. "You did a beautiful job," she said, glancing around at the room as if she were checking someone else's work. "Very tasteful." "I tried," I replied. My hands were still damp from setting out the condolence book near the guest table. Tulips, Dad's favorite, stood in tall vases near the casket. The photos I'd printed from Mom's old computer flanked the altar. Every detail was something I'd planned, arranged, signed for. She leaned in and said, "I'll say a few words at the end, just something short." I nodded. It wasn't a request. During the service, I sat in the front row alone. Aunt Linda offered to sit beside me, but Melanie insisted she needed her to help with Sophie in the second row. I didn't argue. I'd grown used to making space where no one offered any. The minister spoke softly, words blurring at the edges of my attention. I caught phrases: community service, beloved parents, life well lived, but they landed like feathers on water, unable to break through. Then Melanie stepped forward. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. "Mom and Dad were the kind of parents who cheered the loudest at every recital," she began, her voice trembling artfully. "They were there for every scraped knee, every spelling bee, every heartbreak." I stared at the edge of the podium, willing myself not to flinch. "I remember one Christmas," she went on, "when I got sick and couldn't come downstairs. Mom stayed by my side all day. She made hot cocoa and read me Little Women cover to cover. That was who they were. They showed up, always. She didn't mention my name once. Not as her sister, not as another daughter in mourning, not even as someone who had, without help, orchestrated the event we were sitting in. As she walked back to her seat, I heard someone behind me whisper, "She's such a devoted daughter." Another said, "They were so close." I clenched my hands in my lap until my nails left half moons in my palms. Afterward, I stayed to thank guests, accept handshakes and soft murmurs of condolences. Melanie disappeared quickly, claiming the rain was getting worse and Sophie needed to eat. Brian mumbled something about needing to get the kids out of their clothes. I didn't correct him. Sophie was 18. Aunt Linda squeezed my shoulder. "They left a dish for you at the house. I think Melanie made that quinoa salad your mom liked." It took everything I had not to laugh. That evening, after everyone was gone, I drove to our My parents' house. The driveway was slick with rain. Melanie's car was gone. The porch light was on. Inside, the house felt arranged. Not in a warm, homey way, but like it had been prepared for someone else to live there. A few new throw pillows on the couch, a vase I didn't recognize on the dining table. Near the garage door, I spotted 2 cardboard boxes. One was labeled Rachel Closet. The other just said Misk. I knelt beside them. Inside were my high school yearbooks, an old scarf, a mug from my college graduation. Nothing valuable, everything deeply familiar. I opened the Misk box. It held a couple of board games, a lamp I'd bought for the guest room 5 years ago, and a stack of photo albums. I carried them into the living room and sat on the floor, the rain tapping against the windows behind me. The first album was marked 2001 to 2008. I opened it slowly. The first page had a photo of Melanie holding her middle school science fair trophy, grinning with all her braces showing. Then Melanie at prom. Melanie's wedding. Melanie pregnant. Melanie with baby Sophie. I turned page after page. They were all glossy and bright, well printed, well loved. Melanie smiling in various stages of womanhood, sometimes with Brian, often with Sophie. Then, somewhere in the middle, a small photo of me, senior portrait, hair too flat, smile too polite. I flipped again. College graduation, a group photo with extended cousins. I was off to the side, half-cropped. 1 page later, a Christmas group shot. Melanie was front and center. I was near the edge of the frame. That's when the ache came. Not the sharp stab of loss, but the slow, heavy squeeze of invisibility, of being background in someone else's highlight reel. I closed the album and leaned back against the couch. My mother used to scold me for letting Melanie get away with things. "You're older. You should have known better," she'd say, like the time Melanie climbed onto the roof to get a tennis ball. I'd stood at the bottom, begging her to come down. She lost her footing and scraped her knee. I got grounded for encouraging her. I was 12. She was 9. I still remember the sting more than the scrape. Something made me get up. I walked toward the hallway closet, the one Mom always kept locked during storms, filled with coats and candles and boxes of puzzles we never finished. I opened it, expecting old mothballs and a broken umbrella. Instead, I found her blue wool coat, the one she wore every Christmas Eve for as long as I could remember. It was folded neatly, with a small envelope tucked under the collar. I opened it with both hands. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, elegant, tight script that always leaned slightly right. For Rachel, just in case. I pressed the coat to my face. It smelled like gardenias and cedar and something else I couldn't name. Something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. My name hadn't disappeared completely. Not yet. The email from Aunt Linda arrived on a Thursday morning, sandwiched between a dental appointment reminder and a marketing update from work. Subject line, Sophie's graduation plans FYI. I opened it slowly, even though I already knew what I wouldn't find inside. The message included a forwarded invitation, formal font, gold accents, cursive letters dancing across a cream background. It read, "The Hughes family cordially invites you to the graduation of Sophie Marie Hughes, class of 2024. Celebration to follow at the Langley residence. Langley residence." I reread the words 3 times, not sure if it was the name or the casual tone that twisted in my chest more. No Rachel. No please join us. Not even a CC. There are moments when exclusion feels subtle, like a missed call or an unanswered text. And then there are moments like this, curated, printed, and distributed like fact. I sat at my desk in my home office, surrounded by double monitors and open spreadsheets, and stared at the glowing screen. Rain tapped lightly against the window. My inbox blinked with unread messages. I didn't move. Around noon, I walked down to Midtown Brews, the cafe Monica and I used to frequent back when she was still practicing law full-time. These days, she mostly worked as a consultant, less courtrooms, more conscience. She was already at our usual table near the window, 2 mugs between us before I even spoke. Chamomile, she said, nudging one toward me. I slid into the seat across from her, still holding the printed invitation like it was a piece of contraband. She sent it to the entire extended family, I said quietly. Monica looked over the paper, her lips pressing into a tight line. That's bold. It's not just the omission, it's the address, the house, the one you paid for. I nodded. I hadn't told many people, just her, a couple of close friends. It wasn't about pride, it was about privacy, and a little bit about not wanting to explain why I had let my parents live in a home that technically belonged to me. Monica leaned forward. Rachel, I've heard things. I raised an eyebrow. She took a slow sip from her mug. Melanie's been telling people you chose your job over family, that you distanced yourself years ago, that you didn't even want to be involved in Sophie's life. My fingers curled around the mug, knuckles whitening. She said what? I wasn't supposed to hear it. One of my clients is your cousin Nancy's accountant. It came up at a family barbecue. I laughed, but it didn't sound like humor. I babysat Sophie for free every weekend that first year when Melanie was finishing nursing school. Monica gave a slow, knowing nod. People forget facts when fiction serves them better. I looked down at the invite again, tracing the calligraphy with one finger. I'm being erased, I said. It's not even quiet anymore. It's official. Monica didn't argue. She just reached into her bag and pulled out a pen. You could ignore it, she said. I've ignored it for years. Or, she said, sliding the pen toward me, you could RSVP in your own way. That night, I opened my laptop. The glow felt too bright, like it didn't belong in my apartment anymore. I adjusted the screen until it dimmed. I found the group thread, not the invitation list, but the updates thread Aunt Linda had forwarded earlier, filled with family chit-chat about where to park, who was bringing what, and who was staying at the Holiday Inn. I hovered over the reply button. My fingers hovered over the keys. See you soon, I typed, then deleted it. I closed the laptop and walked to the bookshelf where I kept my old photo albums, not the ones from my parents' house. Those had mostly been about Melanie. These were mine. College trips, a few birthdays, a blurry shot of Sophie in a princess dress on my couch, age 4, frosting on her cheeks. I pulled the photo from the sleeve and held it up to the light. She'd written her name on the back in purple crayon, Sophie. The I had been forgotten entirely. I smiled, then slid the photo into the back pocket of my purse. The next morning, I ran into Aunt Linda at the local bookstore, tucked between the history section and a stand of discounted bookmarks. She looked surprised to see me. Rachel, I wasn't sure you were still in town. I live here, Aunt Linda. Oh, right, of course. She glanced at the book in my hand, something about emotional boundaries. She said nothing. So, I said, Sophie's big day. Yes, it'll be beautiful, I think. She's grown into such a young woman, so poised. I nodded. You think they'll mind if I show up? She froze for half a second, then leaned closer. They may not expect you, but they should. I appreciated that. When I got home that evening, I pulled the invitation out again and laid it on the counter. It was heavy, textured paper, formal enough to belong to a wedding, not a high school ceremony. I ran my fingers along the bottom edge. I wasn't invited, I murmured, but I was included in the gossip. I folded the invitation in half, clean and deliberate. I'd still be there. I arrived an hour early, not to cause a scene, just to exist. The morning sun had already baked the parking lot into a shimmer. I parked under a straggly oak and sat with the engine running, the air conditioning humming against the weight in my chest. A breeze stirred the rows of navy and silver balloons tied to the fence around Asheville High's football field. From where I sat, I could see the tops of white folding chairs stretching in neat lines across the grass, a temporary stage shaded under a blue canopy at the 50-yard line. Dad used to say, "The bravest thing you'll ever do is stay visible when someone wants you invisible." I turned off the car and stepped out. By the time the ceremony began, most of the seats were filled. I chose one in the back corner. It was far enough to avoid attention, close enough to see Sophie's name printed in the program. I scanned the crowd casually. Aunt Linda was a few rows up, seated beside a cousin I didn't recognize. Monica had slipped in unnoticed and nodded at me from across the aisle. Then I saw Melanie. She was toward the front, standing with a small group of people I assumed were Brian's family. Her dress was sky blue. Her lipstick, perfect. She smiled at everything. A hostess without a home, yet claiming the field like it was her private lawn. When Sophie walked across the stage to accept her diploma, I watched her face closely. She smiled, waved to someone in the crowd, and gave the principal a brief hug. Her cap tilted slightly to the right. That was new. She used to hate anything uneven. The audience clapped politely. Names were read in alphabetical order. Speeches were given. And then, near the end, Melanie stepped up to the podium. The MC introduced her as a proud parent and community volunteer. She adjusted the microphone with practiced ease. "We're so proud of our graduates," she began. "Watching them grow into their own has been the greatest joy, and I'm grateful to everyone who helped along the way. Family, teachers, friends." She paused and looked around. "Of course, sometimes people drift away. That's life. But I believe in letting go with love. That's what we do. We let them go." I felt it ripple through the back rows. A pause, a turning of heads. Eyes squinted in my direction, not openly hostile, just curious. The kind of glance you give someone whose name you've heard but can't quite place. I stood. People shifted. Melanie froze for just a moment. Brian leaned forward in his chair. I walked steadily down the center aisle. The grass soft beneath my sandals. The murmurs swelled, then quieted as I climbed the side steps of the stage. The MC looked alarmed, but I nodded once and he stepped back. I took the microphone. The plastic was warm under my hand. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't raise my voice. "I didn't drift," I said. "I was erased. You could have heard a leaf fall. I didn't come here to fight or to shame anyone, but I won't let someone else narrate the story I lived." My voice was calm, measured, like I'd practiced it, though I hadn't. 6 years ago, when my parents found their dream home, they couldn't qualify for the mortgage. Their credit wasn't good enough. Their savings weren't enough. So I bought the house for them. I made the payments, quietly, because they were proud people and asked me not to tell anyone. I let that settle for a breath. After the funeral, someone moved in without asking. My things were packed into boxes, photo albums tossed into bins, and it didn't matter to anyone because I'd been left off the list. I looked out into the audience. Melanie was sitting again, her mouth tight. Brian was motionless beside her. Sophie was staring straight at me. I'm not here to reclaim a seat or make a scene. I'm here to remind you that my name was on the deed. But more than that, it was in their hearts, even if it wasn't in the speeches. I paused. And if this moment is uncomfortable, good. That means it mattered. Then I turned slightly, just enough to meet Sophie's gaze. She hadn't moved, but her expression had changed. Subtle, but certain. Her eyes didn't dart away. Her face didn't flinch. She nodded. Once. Just once. That was all I needed. I handed the mic back to the MC, who looked like he wanted to melt into the bleachers. He mumbled something into the microphone about refreshments and thank yous. I didn't hear the rest. I stepped down the stairs, past rows of hushed conversations and searching stares. The sky had turned a deeper blue overhead, heavy with summer. I didn't look back. Not even once. No one stopped me in the parking lot. That somehow hurt the most. No one rushed after me, called out my name, tried to smooth things over with a hug or a, "You didn't have to do that." The lot buzzed with idling cars, tailgates lifting, families herding graduates into SUVs with flowers and balloons. But around me? Silence. Space. I drove home with the windows down, letting the thick summer air wash over my face like a second skin. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't rehearse anything in my head. I just drove, blinking a little more often than usual, gripping the wheel a little tighter than necessary. Back at my apartment, I changed out of my graduation day dress and into an old t-shirt I'd had since college. It hung loose in the right places, frayed along the neckline, soft from years of Sunday laundry cycles. I made toast for dinner, even though it was nearly 9. Burned it a little. Ate it anyway. The next morning, my phone lit up with Monica's name. I meant what I said, she told me before I could even say hello. I've never been prouder of someone doing absolutely nothing flashy. I didn't feel proud, I admitted. That's usually how courage works. It feels awful right up until it doesn't. We agreed to meet for lunch later in the week. Something light, something normal. When I hung up, I noticed a new voicemail. Aunt Linda. Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to say, well, I saw you. I saw what you did. And I don't think you destroyed the family, despite what some might say. I think you reminded us of who you are, maybe even who we were supposed to be. There was a pause before she added, more softly, you sound more like your mother than you realize. I listened to it twice, then once more, just for the part about Mom. I hadn't heard her voice in weeks. The last saved voicemail from her was a year old, some reminder about a Sunday farmer's market ending with, Love you, hun, you've always been stronger than you know. I tapped play, sat in the quiet, listened. Later that day, an email pinged into my inbox from melanie.hughes@email.com, subject graduation. You embarrassed everyone. Congrats. That was it. No punctuation, no sign-off. I stared at the screen, then clicked archive. I didn't need to hold on to that. For 3 days, things were still. I worked. I watered the plant by the window that hadn't bloomed in months. I answered texts from 2 cousins, short ones, both some version of, I didn't know. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to parse which part they meant. Then on Friday afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found a small envelope, unmarked except for my name written in tidy cursive. Inside was a photo. Sophie in her cap and gown, standing in front of the school's brick sign, tassel flipped, eyes squinting into the sun. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe just more certain of herself. On the back, written in black ink, were 4 words. Thank you for coming. No name. No date. Just that. I stood in my entryway, holding the photo like it might vanish if I looked away. Then I walked to the fridge. There was a magnet shaped like a lighthouse, something Dad had picked up on a weekend trip to the coast. I used it to pin the photo just above an old one of him and me fishing at Lake Junaluska. I was maybe 12. He was in a baseball cap, grinning mid-sentence. I was mid-eye roll. 2 pieces of my life side by side. For the first time, they didn't feel like separate stories. Afterward, I boiled water for tea. Chamomile. As it steeped, I didn't cry. I didn't pace the room or reread Melanie's email or wonder whether I'd started some kind of irreversible family fracture. I just sat and breathed and felt the steam against my face. That felt like a revolution. 3 months later, I changed the locks. It was early August, just past noon. The sun was high and mean, painting the sidewalk in shimmering waves, the cicadas so loud they felt stitched into the air itself. The locksmith was a quiet man with kind eyes. He knelt by the front door, tools spread across a cloth like a surgeon preparing for something sacred. He worked quickly, his motions practiced, almost gentle. When he stood up and dropped the old lock into my hand, I didn't flinch. It's time, I said, more to myself than to him. He nodded, wiped his hands, and tipped his cap before walking back to his van. The house, the Langley house as people still called it, looked the same from the outside. White siding, navy shutters, porch swing swaying lazily under a whirring fan. But inside, things were different. The dusty curtains were gone. I'd replaced them with gauzy linen ones that let in just enough sun to make everything feel soft. The walls were now a pale gray, cool and quiet. The old rug with the wine stain from one of Dad's holiday parties had been rolled up and stored in the garage. I couldn't bring myself to toss it. The day I moved in, Monica showed up with a flat of sparkling water, a set of dish towels, and a box labeled Emotional Support Snacks. She stayed long enough to help me carry a heavy lamp inside and hang the photo I'd chosen for the fireplace. Dad and me at the lake, that same grin frozen forever, the water behind us catching sunlight like a promise. When we finished, she stepped back and nodded. "Looks good, solid, centered." "Thanks for helping," I said. "You'd do the same." She left not long after, waving as she pulled out of the driveway. I stood in the front room for a while, just breathing, listening. It was the first time the house didn't echo. Later that afternoon, while unpacking a box labeled Kitchen Odds and Ends, I found Mom's old blue recipe book. The spiral binding was worn, the edges curled and stained with time. Inside were pages of clippings, handwritten notes, and scribbled grocery lists, each one like a whisper from another lifetime. She had written in tiny print along the margin of a meatloaf recipe, "Don't overdo the garlic, Rachel hates that." I sat on the kitchen floor for a while, book in my lap, fingers tracing those words like they were the last thread of something I hadn't realized I was still holding onto. The next morning, I checked the mailbox. In it was a single postcard, no return address, no stamp, just my name, written in looping letters across the front. On the back were 3 words, "You were seen," signed simply S. I held it for a long time, standing barefoot on the porch, the boards warm under my feet. I didn't need to guess who sent it. Sophie had always been subtle, but when she wanted to speak, she found a way. I walked back inside and began what I hadn't done in all the years the house had existed. I walked through it room by room, saying hello. Not out loud, not in ceremony, just a quiet mental acknowledgement. The hallway that always smelled like floor polish, the bathroom where Mom kept lavender soap, the back bedroom that had once held an old twin bed and my childhood desk. When I reached the master bedroom, their room, I stood at the doorway a long time. The furniture was gone, replaced by something simpler, lighter, but the space still breathed like memory. I stepped inside, took one full turn, then kept going. Sometimes the only way to claim something is to walk it slowly, like a border, like a vow. That night, I brewed tea in Mom's old kettle, chamomile again. Some habits feel less like rituals and more like lifelines. I sat on the porch with my mug, watching the light fade behind the trees. The porch fan spun above me. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The cicadas buzzed like an old song playing on repeat. I didn't feel triumphant, or bitter, or even particularly brave. I just felt still, whole, uninterrupted. And as I closed my eyes, I thought, this is how freedom sounds. The day I changed the locks, I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. Not because I'd won anything, but because I finally stopped asking permission to exist where I already belonged. Sometimes families forget that silence can wound just as deeply as words. But even in the quietest hurt, there's still a choice: to disappear, or to stand gently and say, I'm still here. In life, claiming your place doesn't mean taking someone else's. It just means drawing a line that says you matter too. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, old wounds, quiet strength, or small acts of courage, I'd be honored if you shared your thoughts. Sometimes, telling our truth helps others find their voice too.